often we find business owners are pushing for management accounts, cash flows, because ultimately that's what they have in their board reports when they look at how the business is performing. But the truth of all of this is when we get to the board report, that's looking backwards, it's not looking forwards. So the question then becomes, well, can you join up real-time reporting with real-time decisions? So it's not saying there isn't a place for management reports and cash flows and board reports, but actually where do the decisions sit? Do the real decisions sit in the boardroom, or do the actual decisions sit in the operational movements of the day-to-day? Hi, and welcome to the Build and Exit podcast. I'm Julie Wilkinson and I'm your host. So I haven't recorded for a while, but I really want to share something that's been consistently coming up in the work we've been doing with clients. It's really going to help founders look at why they're struggling to make decisions off their numbers. So something that's consistently been coming up is businesses are growing, their numbers are strong, they've got good cash and good pipelines, but something is stopping the leaders trusting the numbers. So what do I mean by this? There's systems in place, reporting's in place, so management accounts and cash flows. Teams are in place, so they've got finance teams and operational teams that are keeping the business running. And there's data. So in principle, everything is there, but something is glitching where owners are struggling to make decisions. So something doesn't feel right, or cash doesn't land where it's meant to, and it's ultimately impacting the growth of the business and their own personal journeys. So we're finding businesses are at a position where finance technically works, but leaders stop trusting the numbers. I'm going to be sharing some tips on what we're seeing across scaling businesses and how we're helping businesses overcome system and data flow. So ultimately, leaders can start trusting their numbers and making decisions. First of all, I want to break it out a little bit about what this actually means and where it's showing up for business owners. So it's scenarios like this. The business owner, the business has a management report. They've got a finance team and the data's coming out. They have an accountant at year end, but the numbers are different. So, and there's a difficulty in bridging the gap between what the data showed from the management accounts versus what the year-end accounts show. And from the business owner's perspective, who's responsible for bridging that gap? So that's one area of example. This then usually shows up in cash flow first. So a key theme we see for business owners is there's a cash flow report. It maybe looks out 16 weeks and it's saying this is where the cash flow should be. But in reality, the cash never lands where it should. So who explains it? Now, the report's there, the finance team produce it, and often we see the finance team and the CEO are discussing it and then they're redoing the report. The next week comes and the report comes. But actually, there's a hidden risk here, is why is the cash flow wrong? Because is the system pulling the wrong data? Is it that the report's being pulled manually and pulled the wrong data? Or fundamentally, is something happening in the business flow that's stopping the cash flow from actually achieving where it's meant to be achieving in the weeks? So this is where finance becomes a wider issue than just data and reporting. Because finance will be producing numbers, accountants might be producing numbers. The truth is the business model keeping pace with the systems that are in place, or rather systems behind where it needs to be for the business to actually keep up with making decisions? So an example of this might be a customer doesn't pay on time. Now, from a data perspective, cash flow may have been in the cash, so that customer payment would be in the cash and it didn't come in. So from a data and reporting system, the process is often review, it didn't come in, why didn't it come in, and then reflect the new cash position in the cash flow. But actually, if we look a bit deeper into the business model as a whole, the truth is what has made that customer not pay on time? Because this is where it's all these little steps that end up making overall big issues. So if we go back to that cash flow example, yes, the output sits in finance. So the output is the cash flow said it was going to come in. Perhaps operations told the finance the cash was going to come in and it didn't. But ultimately, something in the sequence of the business has stopped the money coming in. So we go back to basics. So we look at, okay, so a customer hasn't paid, but where did it break? So where did the process break? So did the sales team or the account manager know that they hadn't paid? And did they put the account on stop? Does the client have a credit limit? When does the credit limit cut in if the client doesn't pay? Or is that actually reviewed before an order is even placed with a customer and they get credit terms? When do products still go to clients that haven't paid? Or do operational teams know that projects should go on hold if clients haven't paid? How then does that information go over to the finance team so that they know where to phase the money? Because ultimately, finance and the CEO might report and make decisions on it, but they may not be the people that are influencing whether the customer doesn't pay on time in the first place. So this is where lots of processes in a business actually impact the overall finance position. My motto is always, every decision a business makes impacts finance, either in time, cash or profit, because the output of what everybody does in the business is end result commercial, and it ties into customers and cash. So this is where we see the finance breaking down. So how is it impacting leaders? Well, it's making decisions that in principle on paper should be easy to make, but actually they don't always feel confident making it. So let's just say there's a 100k decision to make. Because the cash is always moving, although in principle, the leader should be able to just go, yep, I can sign off that 100k decision. The truth is there's a bit of lack of confidence that somewhere, that because the numbers are moving, because they don't always trust that the end position is going to be as it says, they just can't make that decision quickly. So then it can impact the growth and the strategy of the business, because sometimes they're still making it, they might be making it on gut, or sometimes they could be stalling it. And we tend to find that smaller decisions in cash maybe get made quicker, but when it comes to bigger decisions, that is often where it gets stalled, because there's a risk, well, actually, I don't know if I've got the budget for this. And the underlying question is, well, how do you know if you've got the budget? So this looks like it's not about more data, it's not about more reports, and it's not necessarily about teams aren't performing, or the accountant isn't giving what you need, or the finance team isn't giving you what you need. It's like, fundamentally, are the systems in place giving you the ability to make these real-time decisions? So when we look at that means finance becomes bigger than just, have I got a system and have I got a report? Often we find business owners are pushing for management accounts, cash flows, because ultimately that's what they have in their board reports when they look at how the business is performing. But the truth of all of this is, when we get to the board report, that's looking backwards, it's not looking forwards. So the question then becomes, well, can you join up real-time reporting with real-time decisions? So it's not saying there isn't a place for management reports and cash flows and board reports, because obviously we have to, there has to be a review of how the business has performed for decision. But actually, where do the decisions sit? Do the real decisions sit in the boardroom, or do the actual decisions sit in the operational movements of the day-to-day? So if you wanted to just make a decision, well, should that customer place an order? The truth is, the real-time impact of that can't wait until at the end of every month, because you'd have a bottleneck of customers and somebody having to sign it off. So there'll be an operational process where people in the business will be doing certain things. So marketing people will be responsible, sales directors will be responsible for something else, operational teams will be delivering, and finance will be reporting on the output of how the finances are in the business based off how the business has performed. But do those functions combine with each other? And does that information flow across the necessary systems and reports so that the right people can make the right decision at the right time? So going back to the cash flow example, how do the sales? So it's one thing having the cash in the cash flow and it not happening, but that's quite reactive, because if you're running a cash flow every week and then every week customers aren't paying, you're feeding back to the operational team, but that could delay decisions by 3 or 4 weeks, if not longer, because what that spurs is, it's not just these customers haven't paid, it's usually, well, are the reports right? Are the reports right? Or do we have to rework the report? So that can stall decisions. So the question then comes, well, how would the operational processes tell finance if the customer's going to pay? Because ultimately, the cash flow and the finance is there to help strategically steer the future decisions. So it should be, this is my cash position, this is our profitability, this is our return, and these are the decisions we can make. But if actually finance are reacting, so this should be the cash, and every week it doesn't happen, what happens is the strategy gets put on hold and the rework happens of the reports. So we look at it differently and we look at, well, what happens if operationally information flows real time so that the rework stops and it reduces the risk to the cash and ultimately the wrong reporting of data. So we wouldn't just be looking at, so this isn't then just about, well, what does the cash flow produce? It's about what are our operational policies, that mean our cash and our information flows through the relevant channels, systems and departments so that the data that comes out of the system shows the accurate position, so we remove the need for rework and we can make quicker decisions. So in terms of the cash flow scenario, we would be looking at, in these policies, would be looking at how quick can the sales directors find out if customers aren't paying and how often is it happening? When does credit limits get set and when are they reviewed? How do operational people know not to send out products or work on projects if it's service-based, if clients haven't paid at the right time? And then ultimately, how is that information all flowing through the systems, through the data, through the people, so that when the information comes out of the systems for the finance or the CEO or whoever's running that report, that this is real time, the customers, there's low risk the customers won't pay because we put all these processes in place first. And that then brings confidence. Leaders get more confidence because they know the systems work. So going back to the impact that we find on the leaders, one of it is not trusted and not being able to make decisions. We often find that leaders will then be going on and reworking or rechecking numbers, either themselves or getting their teams to rework the numbers. So either that is constantly finding things don't work and then them going online themselves and doing it because they think if they're doing it right. Or that might be they manage their teams thinking their teams aren't doing it right, but actually it's just the system not producing the right information at the right time. So nothing's technically broken, but systems haven't caught up with growth. So this isn't about fixing report, managing teams, or having to constantly rework numbers. That's the output of data flow that doesn't join up. So it's about operationally, can your information flow between teams and systems and ultimately reports so that the leaders can trust the numbers? So how do we go about fixing these constraints? It's not about fixing everything. It's not about building more reports. And it's not necessarily more Excel, because we do tend to find that when one report is broken, people are often going, it's the system that doesn't work, we need a new system, or the report's broken, let's redesign a new report. But actually the truth of it is the output of reports is as good as the inputs coming in. Now, part of that is data, because data is needed, because data tells us certain things like the credit limit would be a data input. The how many times the customer hasn't paid might be a data input because it might show on the system. Now they're the data inputs, but actually it's the flow of the information. Is that flow can be fully automated in some systems, but actually that could be very costly and timely and it might not be in place right now. So it's, well, what's the interim solution for the information to flow if we don't have all the full systems in place? And actually, time versus reward, do we need fully automated systems or do we need better policies? So when we look at fixing data flow, we look at how does the information move, where is it broken, and who owns it? Because those three things, although might not be technically what people see as finance deliverables, because from our surveys and the discussions we have with business owners, they ultimately think accountants, CFOs, finance teams are there to deliver reports and help the business grow. But actually, to do that, it relies on a good infrastructure where the business can actually have information, because you can have the best and most equipped finance team in the world, but if the system can't flow through to them to give them the information, like things like the credit limits and the customers not paying on time, then they're not, finance aren't responsible for every single operational bottleneck in the business. Other departments are, but it's the poor information leads to either the lack of decisions because the leaders don't trust it, or ultimately wrong decisions if they use the information off the wrong data set. So how we look to fix it is not everything at once and not more reports. We look at the whole foundational operational business model and how it interlinks with finance. So how are your systems, your data and reporting all interlinking so that the information can flow and then the final reports can give the information that they that the leaders need to make those 100k decisions that ultimately they may not have been able to make originally because they didn't trust and the time was spent on rework. So they can make those decisions quickly because they trust the source of the information that's coming out of the system. So I hope that helps. Like I said at the beginning, I haven't recorded for 4 or 5 months because I've been focusing heavily on designing a framework that's helping business owners overcome these challenges that we're seeing in businesses where finance technically works but leaders aren't trusting the numbers. And I'm really excited because I'm going to be sharing lots more of these types of conversations over the coming months to help owners look at how do they maximize their businesses, how do they know if they're trusting the information, and how do we start aligning business infrastructure with finance so that business infrastructure setups are set up effectively for as the business develops. So I'm going to be sharing lots more of these tips over the coming weeks. If you feel it's relevant, then love for you to follow along, hit the subscribe button so more people can find the channel, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.